This is the Dover Download Podcast. My name is Christopher Parker, and for the past 25 years, I've had the pleasure of working with, learning from, and talking to a variety of volunteer, staff, and community members. This podcast explores conversations, activities, and a variety of policies and programs which exist here in Dover to improve the community in one way or another. Longtime listeners to the Dover Download Podcast know that we try to keep episodes to about a half hour in length. This week's episode would have been pretty difficult to do so as it encompassed about a 2-hour conversation. So instead, in the spirit of Season's Givings, we're going to separate this into 2 episodes. So enjoy part 1 of a unique conversation about transparency in government, and we'll be back in your feed next week with part 2. Typically on the Dover Download Podcast, I am the one asking the questions. Today, we're going to flip that and have myself be the interviewee. And no, it's not Donna Benton back to interview me about the Capital Improvements Program. We're going to talk today with Nate Burnitz from the UNH Extension about transparency in local government, about our communications efforts, and whatever he wants to talk about. So I'm going to turn it over to Nate and ask Nate to tell the listener a little bit about himself and about his organization, and then we'll get going.
So my name's Nate Burnitz. My title is Field Specialist for Community and Economic Development at UNH Extension. I serve the Seacoast region. UNH Extension works at a county level, at a regional level throughout the state. But to take a step back, all universities nationally engage in research and teaching. But the nation's land-grant colleges and universities have a third mission, extension. So New Hampshire has one land-grant institution, that's University of New Hampshire, and through cooperative extension, we extend the resources and expertise of the university to address public needs. At a 10,000-foot view, that's what we do, strengthen the people and communities in New Hampshire by providing trusted knowledge, practical education, and cooperative solutions. We have an office in each of New Hampshire's 10 counties, and our Stratford County office, which is where we are, is located right here in Dover, at 273 Locust Street, and it's open to the public. So feel free to stop in. We'd love it. We work in 5 program areas: education and youth development, including New Hampshire 4-H, which hopefully some people know that's one of our program areas. Food and agriculture, which both includes commercial agriculture and even home gardening, which is probably what we get more questions about than anything else. Natural resources, health and well-being, and community and economic development, which is what I do. We focus on building the capacity of communities, economic sectors, and regions to cultivate leaders, identify challenges and opportunities, and pursue collective action. In many cases, consultants and regional planners do these things too, including in Dover. But we play a slightly different role where we want to help communities build the capacity to do more themselves. So often we view a metric of success is when we work with a community and then they don't need us to come back in the future. That's very different from maybe what a consultant wants, where they do want to be brought back. We also really like to work with communities that might not have the resources to bring in, outside expertise. We work for free or a very low subsidized cost because we are supported by the taxpayers of New Hampshire. So that's a little bit about me and UNH.
I'm going to turn it over to you and let you lead the question here, and I'll be hopefully answering.
Before I start asking questions, you kind of introduced the topic of this conversation as transparency and engagement, but I want to talk about why it's me that's here talking to you about this topic and just how I came into this.
Cool.
So I started in beginning of 2023, and since I started, I've been working to try and gain an understanding of the needs of communities on the Seacoast. I'm a little bit of a contrarian by nature. So to me, I want to ask the questions others aren't asking, maybe test assumptions, dig deeper. I don't need to spend a lot of time figuring out that, say, there's a housing and a childcare shortage on the Seacoast. We all know that. We don't need another person to spend time digging into that and learning that, right? So one of the themes that emerged through my research, interviews, observations is that public trust and trust in general is an underlying issue that's actually intertwined with just about everything else. The Carsey School of Public Policy, also at UNH, has done a lot of work on this to measure and understand what they term civic engagement. And trust is a part of civic engagement. And I wanted to go deeper, and ultimately I'm setting out to help communities build public trust.
That's a great and much needed thing.
Yeah. In fact, there was
It's like the bedrock, right? It's like the baseline that we should all have is trusting that the decisions that are being made for the right reasons, and they're being made in a logic and consistent manner.
Absolutely. That's one part of trust, is the intention piece. The other part, I think, is effectiveness. So, I'm a new parent, and whenever we get around to hiring a babysitter for the first time, we're going to want to know two things. Does that babysitter intend, when they're at our house watching our child, to focus their time on our child, or is their intention to bring their boyfriend or girlfriend over and kind of hang out? That's intention. The other piece is kind of competence and effectiveness. It's great that they intend to, focus on our child, but are they actually able to do that? Do they have CPR certification? Have they done this before, right? And you really need both for me to be willing to trust that person. So I view it as kind of a two-part test. I recently published an information brief on the topic that maybe you can link to, but I'm starting to engage more around the topic, and I reached out because I want to learn about the City of Dover's approach to building trust. And this podcast, I think, is maybe a small example of that, but there's really a lot that we can talk about, probably more than we have time to.
Sure.
But starting with this topic of outreach and engagement, when you started the Dover Download podcast, I think that was summer 2022. It was in addition to other ways that the city does outreach with residents. Of course, you have the popular Dover Download newsletter, and just you do a lot of different things and have forever to reach residents. That's what you set out to do as much as possible.
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, the more we can meet people where they're at, the more we can engage people. We can't rely on this is how I would get engaged, or this is how I would think. We need to recognize that there's a variety of demographics in the community, and there's a variety of ways people learn and ingest information. And so the podcast extension of the Dover Download was the idea that we recognize a lot of activities are going on here in the community, some of which people know, some of which we think people know, but why not reinforce it by having different voices come on and chat about those things to the public?
I think you might even be underselling the benefits of a podcast. And I say that, I mentioned before we started talking on air that I used to host a podcast. And I remember the thought process that we went through to figure out, hey, is this worth our time? And there were a few benefits that I remember identifying. So one is they take less time to produce than, say, a well-produced video, right? And we at our organization, I know everybody that works for the City of Dover is really busy, and you're on the taxpayer's dime. You can't really justify spending more time than you need to on anything. And so that is really helpful. I think it's an opportunity to go more in depth to help listeners actually get to know the hosts and their guests more than they would otherwise. So it's not just an opportunity to learn about the topics, but it humanizes you and the other people. And sometimes I think we forget that local government is comprised of people. In many cases, they're our neighbors, but all of them are people.
Yeah, I think you're totally onto something there. I do hear from people a decent amount that say, I learned the following, or why don't you talk about X and Y? And it's not necessarily by email. It's people that I see out and about in the community that say, I listened. And sometimes I'm like, really? You're the one listening to this? And other times it's like a revelation in the other way that it is reaching people at various stages and various age groups and demographics. Personally, I listen to most podcasts while I'm walking to and from work and things of that nature. But it's interesting to hear where people find the time. And one of the things that I think Mike and I have done, more so him because he's doing the actual production side of it. I'm just the loudmouth behind the microphone. But we tend to hit between 20 and 25 minutes total. And I keep hearing that that's a good digestible. People like that it's a clear time frame, that it's not unwieldy. It's not the Joe Rogan of municipal podcasts that might go on for 3 hours. It's a clear topic and it's a clear, all right, at the 17 to 20 minute mark, I'm going to be able to hear a little piece of history and enjoy the rest of my day.
If it was a 3-hour podcast, I might be your only listener.
There's actually one or two people that have said that they would like much more in depth. And I said, then reach out directly to the person that was the guest about their topic. They'd be happy to meet with you.
So are any benefits of hosting the podcast surprising? I mean, you mentioned talking to some people where you were a little bit surprised that they were your listeners. Can you just talk about the difference between what you thought setting out and what the benefits have been?
So I guess in my mind, I had a parochial view that podcasts were an older person thing. And so the spread of ages of people that say they listen, I also thought it would be people that are already somewhat connected because they're going to see it in the Dover download. So they'll see the connection and think, oh, maybe I'll give it a try. But I've seen a real variety of people that say, oh, I found out a bit about it because someone sent me a link directly to that episode about X.
So it sometimes operates as the front door.
Correct.
City,
Yeah.
Which is, wow, that's great.
It's great. Yeah. You mentioned that video takes longer to produce. But what I do know is that people have told me, and I can relate to this in a lot of ways, that they listen because they don't have to watch. They can have it. It's much easier to do background of an audio than if you have a video version that you're more apt to want to watch it and you're more apt to want to sit and have it be the primary focus. And so people have said, I exercise to it, I grocery shop to it, I drive to it. I don't have to have all my senses focused on it. I can have it in my earbuds, but not take away from another activity. And of course, because we all multitask more than we really should, that's just what's occurring. So that part of it I find interesting because I think we are such a visual entity, meaning humans. We value aesthetics so heavily that I thought that there would be a component. And we've talked about, is there an opportunity to do? In fact, I think at one point we did talk about it being more of like a call-in talk show host type thing of where it was using, I won't say downtime, but using non-exclusive time on Channel 22, our local government channel, to have an actual video version. But I think this medium works really well for us. And one of the things it's done, and this gets to your maybe unintended consequences, is we in the Office of Business Development puts out a weekly newsletter called Down to Business. It's an e-newsletter. And a lot of times knowing what the topic for the podcast is, which we'll certainly reference in the newsletter, just as the Dover Download references it, we'll ping off of whether it's myself, our small business coordinator, or our business development coordinator. We'll ping off it and use that as a launch pad for a more in-depth written piece so that they can reinforce each other. It's interesting because you can see click-throughs and you can see that sort of thing through Constant Contact and other means. We can tell where someone will read through the more detailed analysis or missive, or just listen and get what they need there. So.
And that ends up being feedback without someone actually having to give you feedback, which is
very true.
And kind of parlaying off that thought that you had around doing a talk show, that kind of transitions to the way I think about outreach and engagement. So I view outreach, and this is really just my definition, not anything official, but I think of outreach as being kind of a one-way conversation.
Yep.
Like a podcast. Yep. Or a newsletter. And I think of engagement as being a two-way conversation. So how does outreach, like this podcast and the other ways that you go out to people, how does that actually become engagement? Have you seen outreach turn into engagement here in Dover, maybe through this podcast or other?
So I've seen it in a couple means. The first is there are a core group of people that will give me feedback in the sense of, I listened, I wish you had gone deeper on X, which sometimes has led to a follow-up episode. We've also seen a scenario where people have given us engagement in the sense of, how do I get more information? Okay, I heard about X. now I really want to, my interest is piqued and now I want to dive in. What would be great is that true two-way of a back and forth conversation is created, coupled with someone saying, you know what, my expertise is actually in that area. How do I get involved on a board or committee to help support that initiative, that support that activity, and give back to the community? That to me would be the true engagement level that we should be trying to reach. Is, you're right. I look at this as a passive scenario. I am providing information, hopefully educating folks about a variety of topics or projects or activities or programs. In my mind, you can either take it at that, you're listening to it while you're doing your groceries, and you come away thinking, I didn't realize that that's how absentee ballots were counted, and now I know. Versus the next level of really rolling up your sleeves and digging in and saying, okay, you know what would be great? If I could become a poll worker and help make that process go even smoother for someone else on election day next year. And then you have the really super engaged that say, I want to run for office. I don't want to just help other people make sure that there's integrity in the system, which there is definitely integrity in the voting system. But I want to now become a moderator or a select person or ultimately run for council or school board. To me, that would be an uber engagement.
And as I walked into the McConnell Center, I saw signs for the Citizen Leadership Academy, which seems like a great next step potentially for someone who, wants to get involved. And that's not something that very many cities and towns have, that as a very concrete way of taking that next step.
I'm glad you brought up the Citizens Leadership Academy, because it's a great program that we do with the Chamber of Commerce and have done, I think, for about 10 years now. In 2012, I did Leadership Seacoast, and then in 2015, I did Leadership New Hampshire. And both are really valid programs, and both are really good programs to get you to know the region and the state better. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't know your own community, you can't be engaged to the fullest extent you should be. And so I think it's a great initiative that we started here. Every year, we see about 15 to 20 participants. And I think on average, maybe 5 to 10 of them will go on to being on boards, committees, or commissions. I think at one point, the planning board had like 5 people that had gone through that program all on it at one time. I know there's city councilors that have done it. It's a great initiative. And it's core. So you think you know government? Come and spend 6 weeks with us and learn about it. And maybe you'll learn something. Each night is typically focused on one area or one service delivery method. And there's probably, of the 2-hour sessions, there's an hour to an hour and a half of program, and then half hour to an hour of Q&A, so that it's not just people talking to you, but there's conversation, engagement, et cetera, as part of that night's delivery as well. And you get to ride a fire truck and go down to the wastewater treatment plant and see where all the business of the city is done. So it's always a fun part.
Yeah, sounds like living in Dover is pretty great. So something I've taken note of with the podcast is how many guests you've had on, including a lot of people that the general public might not otherwise have a lot of interaction with. Obviously, that's great for your listeners, but how do you think that also benefits the staff, volunteers, and partners who come on the show? Particularly like staff, the people that are working behind the scenes that don't have a lot of that interaction.
So part of the thought is that if you know a staff person, it's probably a department head. They're probably the ones quoted in the paper, or they're probably the ones that you see at the podium in a city council meeting or similar. And that's all well and good. And I was a department head for 17 years. And I can tell you, when I was the planning director, it wasn't just me doing the work in the office. And that there are a variety of staff that all play their roles. And if we don't have those folks doing their jobs, we don't succeed as a community. And certainly we don't succeed as a municipal corporation. So part of the thought was, let's shine some light on these folks and thank them for the work they're doing and make sure that people are aware that they do their jobs. Some of them have been reluctant, and then you get them on here and they're all chatty, which is great. I remember we had on our deputy finance director, who for a long time was our purchasing agent, and she came on to talk about having worked here for over 25 years and give some thought to what's changed. And she, behind the scenes, was very reluctant. And people said that they really enjoy learning about finance and purchasing. And it reinforced that not only is there a person back there, but that there is some judgment involved and that it's not I got a credit card, I might as well go spend some money. And I think that was an important aspect of it. I think it's great when we have police, fire, and public works folks on, because there is a stigma or a prejudgment on each of those roles. And so having the ability to have folks come on and talk like you and I and be relatable. One of the ones that I think that we've had a lot of listenership to is the plowing episode. What it's like to plow truck. We see these folks all over the place on the now 5 winter days we have. And you know what? I've done that. I've been a plow person. I was a wingman almost 30 years ago. It's a long day. And having someone come on and talk about that, and then talk about why it's important to make sure that your recycling bin isn't in the sidewalk, or think about the fact that if snow gets pushed into something and the plow gets stuck and broken down, what that means from a response time, and how you don't think it impacts you, but it really does. I think that's all relatable stuff that people need to hear.
You mentioned transparency at the top as well, so let's talk a little bit about that. Something I value about transparency is that it helps people actually understand the intentions of those in government. So if residents can actually hear city officials talk about their thought process, broader context, that can help personalize local government. But that's really only a part of transparency. Residents also have the right to access public information, budgets, meeting minutes, etc. So over the time you've been with the city, are there any ways that the city has lowered the friction around transparency, or put another way, made it easier and more straightforward for people to access and understand public information?
I can think of 3 main ways. The first is annually we produce a document that goes through who everyone is, what their position is, what their salary, benefits, and total cost of employment is. And it's a document that somewhat came out of a request that was not wholeheartedly embraced in the early aughts. And now it's one of those things that we just do. And I think that's an example of transparency, that if you want to know where your tax dollars are going, and whether that's true or not, it might not be the case because there's grant funding, et cetera, but you have an opportunity. The second is I would challenge anyone, bar none, to find another municipality that publishes a budget document equal to ours. If you look at our 800 to 900 page budget document, the line item detail is way more transparent than anywhere else. You see on a personal level what we're doing. You see how many paper clips we think we're going to buy. And it truly is too much detail in a lot of ways, because it can be overwhelming. But from time to time, I go look at other municipalities' websites, and you look and they will have just a general personal line item. And they might tell you that there are 5 people contained in that line item, but it's just a dollar amount at the end of the day. We will go through and tell you exactly who, position and name, and then if there are grants or there are other things that are paying towards those salary lines. And I'm using, in this case, people, because the biggest chunk of the municipal budget is the people that are hired to do things. Things don't just happen. But then the third along the same budget line is, if you look at our website under our budget revealed section of our website, you can put in your address and find out how much you pay in taxes, and then where it gets broken down and what the different sectors are funded out of it. We've done a lot. I think we hear 2 things about our website. The first is there's way too much information and I can't find what I'm looking for. And the second is there's too much information and I found what I was looking for, but then I also found all this other stuff that I didn't know was going to be on the website. One other area I think is a good example. When you're home tonight, go on a municipal website. Try to find someone's phone number or email. If you look on ours, you'll find my phone number and you'll find my email. And one of the things that I think we stand out for is, top to bottom, If you have an email, we put it up there for people to find, and we put up phone numbers. It's not all channeled through 516-6000, which is the general number, and it's funneled through a web form that you have to fill out that behind the scenes sends someone an email. We do have a request form, a question form that will do that. But if you want to send me an email at c.parker@dover.nh.gov, which has been my email for 27 years, you can find that on the website and send it. I think it's like the most basic level of transparency. But it's amazing to me when I go to try to find a colleague's email on their website and I'm like, I got to fill out a form. How hard is it for someone to know what someone's email or phone number is? Like, what are you hiding?
This all resonates with anyone who's lived anywhere but Dover. You're right. The thing about local government is that regardless of how much or little information you give people, it's complex either way. Linking back to the podcast for a second, it may be complex, but then the podcast is an opportunity to kind of talk through that and help people understand. But nonetheless, local government actually is complex. There are layers of laws and rules that the city operates under, and it's also, local government's kind of boring at times too, just by its nature. Not saying you're boring, quite the opposite, but it is fundamentally boring, which is fine, actually.
Sure.
But those already involved sometimes in local government and kind of in the weeds, I think can at times lose sight of how intimidating and complex these issues of local government are. And from the outside, someone who might want to get involved in improving their community, they may care about an issue, but when you actually try and get involved, it might not be very straightforward. The podcast is an example of this, like I said, but can you talk about how the city tries to make understanding and getting involved in local government more accessible and straightforward? And I want to compliment you before you answer. Something that you do really well is avoiding acronyms.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you a quick story about that first. Years ago, we were working on our tax increment finance district, and this was 2014. And myself and the planning director, who was then an intern, she and I went with the city attorney and the finance director to another community. I will not say its Rochester name. And we were meeting with their finance director, their attorney, and their economic development director to talk about tax increment financing, which people will call TIF. And we're going through the conversation, and every other thing was an acronym, whether it was TIF, whether it was MS1, whether it was all of these sorts of things. And at one point, I said, they're interns. They're not exposed to that. What does that mean? So every time you use an acronym, please explain what you're saying. I always use that mentality when I'm on here or when we chat, because the more you make something jargon, the less relatable it is, and the more aloof and hoity-toity I sound.
It actually even creates separation between the experts and everybody else, which is not great for public trust, by the way.
There's enough us and them out there. We don't need to engender that. The majority of my time with the city has been in the land use area, and particularly in the planning department. And one of the things I used to preach to planning staff was, if you write rules and regulations that only you or an attorney can read, no one will use them. So we want to write rules and regulations for the public to be able to do. You should be able to look at something and say, I want to build a fence. How do I build a fence? And not have to go to law school to learn how to build a fence.
Yeah, so how do you do that besides minimizing acronyms?
So twofold. One is have friends and relatives that aren't in government that you can say, if I was going to tell you this, how would you want to hear it?
That's a great idea.
The second is I'm lucky enough to have a child who thinks that to your statement about government being boring, he would wholeheartedly agree with that, having been drawn to enough meetings because I didn't have daycare on a Saturday morning. In my mind, it's all going to be relatable. Just as we're your neighbors, we're you, right? And no one likes to be talked down to, and no one likes to be left out of the conversation. So when we create conversation and communication tools, we should keep I don't want to say lowest common denominator, but a basic understanding, a basic rule. It's just like when you design a road, you should design a road for people to walk safely on, because if you can walk safely on it, you can bike on it, you can drive a car, you can drive a bus, whatever you need to do. You ride a unicycle, who cares? If you create communications for government and you effectuate it, which is probably a word I shouldn't use if I'm trying to reach everyone, in such a way that it's relatable and understandable. And I'm not talking about the old speak to a sixth grade level, but humanize things. And just as you were mentioning earlier that you like when we bring on some of the staff that are behind the scenes, it's humanizing government, right? It's not a widget maker somewhere off in the bowels of City Hall. It's the person that you think, oh, I could be that person. I could have that conversation. And so in my mind, you flip that. And I say, I listen to enough podcasts. If I was listening to this, what would I find interesting? If I was listening to this episode, that's why I actually liked this idea of flipping the conversation here, because I'm thinking, if I'm listening to something, at what point do I turn off the episode? At what point do I go, yeah, this topic's just not for me today? As we're putting the topics together and as we're looking at what engagement areas, Mike and I talk once a month, we go through the what's upcoming and whether it's a date specific, so the rollout of the budget. We have to do an episode of that in February because it's relevant. The capital improvements program is late summer, early fall. Those sorts of things need timing to them, but a lot of these topics don't. So we're looking at it and saying, okay, last year in season 3, we had the following episodes. Which one of those do we know people liked? Which one of those just sounded like they would be a good idea in my head, but the listeners, whether through the click-throughs or through the feedback that Mike and I get, just didn't hit with people? And how can we learn from that? And I go back and re-listen to them. Every time Mike says, here's what our stats are, I'm like, well, 4 of those are me. Because I go back and listen and say, okay, where was I off? There's a gentleman that will say, like every Wednesday, he'll send me a note or he'll stop me and say, well, that was a dog. Or that was a great episode. And I'll always say, well, you can't just tell me that. You got to give me some feedback. Why? What didn't work? What did work? And then I'll go back and listen to it from that angle and try to hear what he heard, pro or con, and then write notes to myself, because if I stink, the whole episode is going to stink, because why would you want to be engaged with me, whether you're the listener or the person on the other end of the mic, if I'm not floating high?
Yeah, that's great. And by the way, keep that guy around. That's really helpful. So going back to my little metaphor about finding a good babysitter.
Yeah.
We've talked mostly about transparency, intentions, the one side of the trust coin. The other side is kind of effectiveness, competence. And so let's talk about actually delivering government services and the connection with trust. So stepping back, won't surprise anyone to know that trust has been on the decline for a long time, most dramatically at the federal level, where trust in all government branches, media, other institutions has been on the decline and is probably as low as it's ever been. But trust in local government's been declining too, all across the country. And we've talked about transparency, which can help build and maintain trust, but delivering governmental services, transparency doesn't do a lot of good if it's just providing a window into an ineffective government. Mm-hmm. So what does effective government look like to you? And what do you think it looks like to city residents from their perspective?
I think the baseline, as you say, is a competence in the sense, and I'll use trash removal as an example.
Great example.
If every week I put my recycling and my compost out, and every week they're still sitting there the next day or when I get home from work, then I start to think, wait a second. First I might think, did I put it out late? Oh, it's got to be out by 7 a.m. I put it out at 6, but is that still too late? And then the next time I might be like, okay, who are these idiots driving the trash truck? That is translatable everywhere.
Right. And it doesn't really matter how much information is up on the website about trash collection.
Right.
If you look out your front door and see that it's still standing there.
Right. And so the way that I look at it is when someone from Dover Fire and Rescue shows up, you're probably happy no matter what the scenario is. Because if you are in need of emergency response, you're happy that emergency response is there. How can we translate that to responsiveness elsewhere? And so one of the things that community services we've talked about is creating, and we've rolled it out, a service portal where someone can go in and say, there's X, Y, and Z need in my neighborhood. So here's a pothole, or here's an area where vegetation needs to be cut back for a blind spot, or here's where a street sign got knocked down. When people see that they submit something and they get a return receipt saying this was submitted on your behalf. And then the next day they'll get one that says, we've updated your ticket. It now has a assigned staff to it. And here is the estimated time to turn it around. And then lo and behold, they'll look out and they'll say, a new street sign's been put up, or the pothole. Granted, potholes probably don't get filled in February, March, but, in general. And so that is a good indicator to me that helps us say, what, those public works guys don't just lean on shovels. They're actually doing things. They're dealing with our infrastructure needs. And I think that's translatable to other areas too. When I mentioned earlier the phone number, I can't tell you how many people will call and be like, oh, I didn't think I'd actually get someone on the other end of the phone. And for a while, we taught people, and I think it still happens, maybe less being taught now, that when you answer the phone, smile when you're answering the phone. I'm a big believer that our two most important touch points with the public are the city clerk's office and our inspection services folks, because neither one of them is someone you want to deal with, right? When you're going to the city clerk's office, odds are you're paying a bill because you're registering your car or you're paying your water sewer bill. Who wants to pay anything, right? So when you go in there and you're greeted with a smile and you're greeted with someone that says, I'm just like you. I got a job and I got to pay my bills just like you got a job and you got to pay your bills. Same thing with inspection services. If left to our own druthers, 90% of us would just like to build whatever we want to build or renovate our house however we want to renovate it or do what we want to do. But there are life safety codes and there's building codes and we have to abide by them. And so having those folks come out and with a smile on their face say, I wish you'd called me ahead of time because if you did it this way, it would have been okay, but you did it this way. Here's how we're going to help you correct it. And talking people through as opposed to just saying no, again, relating to them and saying, I get why you did it that way. Here's actually what the code says, and here's the way that you need to process that. A lot of those conversations happened before. I just used the example of someone showing up, but we want to be accessible. We want to be out there for you so that you can call and schedule a pre-construction meeting. But I see those two positions or roles as the most front and center of our customer service experience. And everyone else that's behind the scenes needs to learn from and then reinforce those folks. The worst thing we can do is have someone at the front counter that is very polite and friendly and relatable hand it off to an overstressed, grumpy me in the background who just says, I'll get to you when I get to you. You're on the pile.
I mean,
well, screw you.
Having a culture of customer service is very simple, but not something to be taken for granted. I mean, it's really impressive. And I'm sure the city falls short sometimes. I'm sure not every interaction goes exactly how you're talking about. And probably some listeners can say, well, that one time, but that's your North Star, right? How do you do that?
So part of it is we have core values, integrity being one, customer service being one. I like to say that we're not in the government sector, we're in the customer service sector. Yeah, we're just shy of hospitality in some regards. In the sense that we're here to care for you. There's the old joke, we're the government, we're here to help. That should be the truth. We should be here with integrity. We should be looking at things from a stewardship standpoint. We should look at things from a point of view. I live here, right? And so I can say, well, I'm going to get impacted by that tax increase as well, or that service cut as well. Regardless of whether an employee lives here or not, we want them to have that feeling. We want them to understand that our culture here is to respect people and respect the resources we've been given to do the jobs we have.
I mean, the reason people roll their eyes around that I'm here from the government, I'm here to help is because of a lot that you can't control. You can only control really the experiences that people have here in the city of Dover. You can't control people's experiences with state government, federal government, whatever. And even though those are separate things, it's all government and people are going to make connections and not necessarily, see, here's the city of Dover and that's where it ends and here's where another entity is, which is all to say that what you're talking about, creating this culture and this expectation of good customer service, of integrity, of transparency, it's really hard, not only because it's hard, but also because people have other experiences too.
I've heard from some staff people that live in other communities that they like going to their city hall, their organization, and comparing. And they use it both as a learning tool both they did that really well. How can we learn from that? And oh, I can't believe that happened. We have to prevent that from happening at work. I like to say one of the reasons that I've stayed here so long is that it's a learning environment. We don't just do things because we've done them. We do them, we evaluate them, and we improve them when we can improve them. And where things have to be cut, where we have to say, you know what, just because we did that in 1997 doesn't mean we should be still doing it that way. There's opportunities through the lean process we've used, through other processes to say, is this really the best way to do it? I enjoy having new people come in and say, have we ever thought about doing it this way? Because the answer shouldn't be, yeah, we thought about it, we didn't do it. The answer should be, what do you see that we could do differently if we do it that way? And having someone with fresh eyes say, wow, the technology now allows to do X, Y, and Z, or the thought and thinking has changed on that. And you might have tried it this way before, but if we tried it this way now, it would actually work.
When local government's working well, we don't have to think about it too much, right? So when your trash is getting picked up as it should, it's not really something that you take a lot of time to think about, like, wow, the trash collection's going really well. It's something you take for granted, and that's fine. People should take these things for granted, I think, and not have to think about government 24/7. But I wish I didn't have to think about it as much as I do. But when something stops working well, that's when people start paying more attention and asking questions. And we hope there's never a crisis, but it's when things stop working well and people start paying attention that I think cities and towns actually have an opportunity to either build or lose public trust by the way that they respond. So can you maybe talk about an example of that, how the city handled it? And I do think COVID was one of those examples where all of a sudden kind of everything stopped working because of something beyond control. And it was, I think, an opportunity for cities and towns to show how responsive they can be.
It was, and it was also an opportunity to speed up some things that had already been coming. And typically, when we say those things, we think about work from home. That folks were, and as I said, we're a customer service organization. We can't work from home. We need to be at the point of service. So what we did, I think that was positive and has continued, is improve things like the customer service portal, the request portal, because of contactless communication. The library did a lot of curbside things that they still do, that really wasn't a thing before, right? I mean, the whole goal of the library was to get you into the library. Having to-go bags was not native to that thought process, but they looked at that. In the regulatory world, we looked at things like outdoor dining and said, okay, what's the process for this? Oh, we don't have a process? Great. We can create one. And then after the fact, we can say, how do we keep people interested in doing this sort of thing? And how do we continue to look at how our interactions are streamlined? I'll use outdoor dining again. Natively, there were probably 6 different offices or people that needed to review an outdoor dining application. Whether it was the health license, whether it was the safety aspect of the building official looking at the space, whether it was public works looking at obstructions, whether it was parking or police, we streamlined down to one person. And we said, okay, everyone else contribute to what should be in the process and the code and the application. And then we're going to authorize one person to say, unless I have questions, I'm approving or denying. If I have questions, I might call the city engineer and say, what did you mean by this? Or can you verify that this is okay? Or the health officer, they're doing a health review of the restaurant anyways. So why do we need to have them circle back here?
So this was a way that you reduced the bureaucracy that people in the public experienced. Even if the bureaucracy was still kind of there behind the scenes, they didn't experience it because of this proactive step you took.
Right. And along that lines, we went to an online permit review process for building permits and plan review permits, but then we expanded it to about 26 different permits. If you go on to permits.dover.nh.gov, you can apply for everything from a burn permit to a multi-family site plan. And part of the goal there was there's a lot of opportunity behind the scenes for people to share information and to review things at their desk, as opposed to everything constantly needing to be a meeting, everything constantly being a time suck. You can be as effective through this process. And, you can send the applicant questions back and say, hey, you've got a busy day. I don't need you to come in and waste your time, take time out of your day to come and answer questions. Here's a question. Fill it out at your home at night when you've got time, and we'll review it in the morning.
And that's also kind of an example of an adaptation. And then you saw, hey, this is working. Let's lean into it. Let's build on it. Let's do more of it because it's working.
Right. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of this 2-part series. Next week, we'll be back with part 2, and you can hear where the conversation goes and how it wraps up.